Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here, David. David, for everyone out there listening who might not know who you are, can you please introduce yourself?
My name's David Wood. I chair London Futurists, which is a meetup that has been meeting since 2008 to discuss radical ideas about the future. I'm also somebody who's worked in the smartphone industry since well before there were smartphones, if that makes sense. So with companies such as Nokia and Motorola and Ericsson, before the rise of Apple and Android. And I am an active transhumanist.
How many people miss the BlackBerry, I have to ask?
BlackBerry was a wonderful device. It did several things very well indeed. It focused on secure messaging. And in the end, like my own software, Symbian, it got overtaken by more nimble, faster moving companies that were able to apply more powerful hardware and software solutions. So it's a great shame, but that's how technology moves forwards. There are levels, there are paradigms, there are platforms which are very successful for a while, and then often the mantle gets picked up by somebody else on the next leg of the race.
Now, what exactly is London Futurists, and what are you guys focused on when it comes to future? I mean, you can talk about ethical issues when it comes to the way the world goes with weapons or war. We can talk about the environment. I mean, does it cover all that, or is it strictly focused on what I would say we would call future technologies or the advancement into the future when it does come to technologies?
I mean, you can't talk about the future of technology without talking about the future of all these other things as well. How technology develops depends very much on political situations, legal situations, ethical considerations, and on what people think can be done with technology. So the human dimension and the technological dimension are deeply linked together. And if you just try and isolate the tech, you can understand certain patterns and trends to an extent, but you're going to be misled and you will not have a good appreciation of the possibilities ahead.
Do you think it's about understanding maybe human psychology? Because it seems like a lot of people poke blame at tech. They look to tech to save the world. They look to tech at like maybe the advancement of it could help us fix environmental issues, could fix so much stuff. But when it really comes to the way that we use it, I mean, are we using it in the best of lights? I mean, in my opinion, from at least the talks that I've had and the perspective I've had at the age of 24, I don't think that we've really used it in the best of ways. It seems to be we're using it at its base level. It seems like it could have way more advancement, I would say, when it comes to, I mean, the amount of transhumanists I talk to that just explain the full depths of what technology can really do for us. And we're using it to sell ads for a Viagra commercial. It's kind of a little upsetting in a sense.
We could be doing so much more with technology, and the technology of the near future, 5, 10, 15 years into the future, will allow us to do radically more things. Maybe the most important message I've got is that within one generation or so, the world could be very, very much better than it is today. But also within that same timescale, the world could be very much worse than it is today. There is the scenario of sustainable future abundance, and there's a scenario of a collapse in the environment, a collapse in society, a new dark age. And both of them are in play. And what will make the difference is whether we can wake up sufficiently to the possibilities, whether we push off distractions, whether we're wise enough to collaborate in ways that take real advantage of the possibilities of technology and don't fall foul of the bad consequences that are also in the technological possibilities.
Does your direction of where we're headed in compared to the direction of what you would like us to go in are they the same or are they different? Like, where do you see us going with tech? Do you see us advancing farther forward? Like, give me your angle.
So 20 years ago, those of us who looked at the internet and smartphones are optimistic. We thought more information is going to allow people to take better decisions. But the internet and smartphones don't just spread information, they spread confusion, they spread deliberate misinformation, they spread patterns of thinking. Sometimes you might call them mental malware that lead us into destructive habits. They split us into tribes. They make us identify as reds versus blues or blues versus reds or some other things, in which it's more important for us to cheer on our perceived tribe and to sneer at the other tribe. And it's getting in the way of truly sharing the best insights, which can come from many different places. So the full possibilities of technology are by no means being developed. Some cases, it's because developing the technology is going to require a lot more investment. So we could talk about nanotechnology, for example. The vision of nanotechnology was set out in the 1980s by somebody from MIT called Eric Drexler. He wrote a pioneering book called Engines of Creation and predicted that in due course we would be manufacturing things at the atomic scale with atomic scale precision. And of course, we do manufacture some things with atomic scale precision, things like semiconductor chips. We can place transistors extremely close to each other in enormous scale. But the kinds of machinery that Eric Drexler envisioned, and which I still think is very much possible, are moving things rather than static things, things that can act the same way as our own biology does. We have nanomachines, if you like, inside our cells. They're called ribosomes, and they process DNA, or more strictly, they process RNA, which is a copy of the DNA, and they turn it into molecules called proteins. And the details of the proteins depend on the details of the DNA. And that's one kind of nanotech. And we could be doing a heck of a lot more, producing nanobots, which could rove around our bodies, detecting damage and patching it up. That's possible. We could have much better materials, and we could have much better sources of clean energy if we'd only gone down that nanotechnology route more. But the investment didn't come. Individual companies were loath to invest on their own behalf because it would take too long to return profits. Venture capitalists have stayed away from this field as well. There is some investment in what is called nanotech, but it's not in this molecular machinery, this factories that would have this big breakthrough. So there's a missed opportunity there so far.
Do you find that whenever you talk about something like this, people always go like, that sounds like sci-fi? Because what I've started to hear from a lot of transhumanists when they're explaining something, and then when I bring it up in a later podcast with someone who might study tech or study AI, they say that's sci-fi stuff. Let's focus on the real stuff. And I go, it's only sci-fi because we really haven't dipped our toes into that pool yet. I mean, if you're involved in that field, if you're a transhumanist, or if you're working like where you do at the London Board of Futurists, it's probably normal. It's probably everyone kind of knows what that is, nanotechnology in general. But when you talk about like little individual nanobots or something that are able to detect viruses or be able to boost your immune system or be able to heal cells faster or something like that, it sounds like sci-fi for the general public, only because we've never really jumped into that field. At least when we think of technology, we still think of, okay, yeah, we can do a smartphone type thing. We can do this. It's like, yeah, we've gone the complete like slow route with it. We could have introduced it way sooner with more ideas and more concepts that didn't sound like it was just part of a movie. Because we could be at that stage that we see like the Jetsons or something like that. Maybe not flying cars, but in other areas as well. We just completely have used it for the base thing when it comes to advertising. And I definitely think that's a lot to really do with the way the world is kind of set on this capitalist idea. I mean, in a sense, is there good capitalism? Sure, people can make that argument. But in the direction we've gone, we've let politics kind of be involved in everything. It seems like everywhere I turn now, it's like there's politics, like you were saying, red versus blue. And it makes you wonder, are they out there for their own nefarious gain? Or are they out there to really make the general public better? And that brings into a bigger question of maybe the reason why people are thinking this is sci-fi, or people think that they can't handle tech like this, is because they've never really had the opportunity to be able to try, and there's an unwillingness to want to learn.
These are a lot of big topics, and they're all important topics. So it'd be good if we can explore them carefully. And you're quite right. People are often perplexed when they hear some of these possibilities, and they are instinctively inclined to say yuck or no, or uh, maybe a wow, but it's a wow in the sense of, well, this is never going to happen. It would be cool, but it's not going to happen. So one thing that's missing, frankly, is a proper education about all these things. We're not being taught enough about the possibilities of new technology in our schools. And even after we leave schools, what we see is often irresponsible journalism. It is lazy in many ways. We need to improve the quality of the material that discusses the future. And if anything, a simple a summary of London Futurists, it's about trying to improve worldwide, not just in London, worldwide, the caliber of the conversation about the future. In terms of things that were science fiction, it doesn't mean they won't become reality. Many things were science fiction in the past and have become reality. If we talk about flying in aeroplanes, and those of us who grew up after airplanes were invented, we take it for granted. You know, it is amazing that these tubes full of metal can fly through the air. If we'd gone back to the late 1800s or even the early 1900s, the idea that such things would be possible was just deemed as fiction. It was something that authors like Jules Verne or H.G. Wells, in their maddest extremes of ideas, might write about, but it wasn't expected anytime soon. Indeed, even the pioneers of heavier than air flight, the Wright brothers, they neither of them believed in their younger days that it would be meaningful to cross the Atlantic in an airplane. They thought you might use an airplane for a short flight, which they did, but in terms of actually flying all the way across the Atlantic, they had their own engineering analysis as to why it was just not possible. But, you know, people were innovative. People found ways to construct lighter airplanes with better fuel, better engines, better navigation systems, and so on. So now every day there are hundreds of flights crossing the Atlantic, and we take it for granted. Just same with smartphones. Today, smartphones are absolute miracles in terms of technology. Now, I mentioned in the introduction, I've been in the smartphone industry for a long time. I had a prototype smartphone in my pocket as early as 1999, a device from Ericsson called the R380. It was very limited in its power compared to modern smartphones, and it was for a long time unclear what people would mainly do with these smartphones. We thought they would exchange picture messages, and perhaps occasionally people would watch videos on them if they weren't close by a big screen. We never imagined how much time people would actually spend watching videos on their smartphones, even when they were sitting in the same room as a big screen TV. And it turns out that the screens have got so much better, the memory storage has got so much better, the networks have got so much better. And it's going to be the same with other technologies, such as artificial intelligence, such as genetic reprogramming. So there'll be messages in the future coming to us. Hey, there's an upgrade. Do you want to upgrade? Do you want to upgrade your DNA to the latest DNA version that fixes these bugs in human biology? In the same way that we get messages from that every now and then. Do you want to upgrade to the new iOS or the latest Android and it will fix various bugs and provide more features? That's coming. And it's the same with cognitive technologies that will enhance our thinking. And it's the same with nanotechnology. But not everything that's discussed is equally credible, and it is important to pin back these discussions about the future to real science and real technology. And that takes time, and it's not something that can be conveyed just in a quick 5-minute conversation or even in a few hours. It takes a lot of time to explain it, which is why, as I said at the beginning of this response, we need a lot better education in the possibilities of the future.
Does with even with the tech we have now, if we can kind of relate it to smartphones, you not think people just have cut off the bridge to wanting technology inside of their body only because they know the fears about like their data being tracked now, their data being taken, individual apps that are from overseas, whether you want to say Dubai, whatever, Saudi Arabia, that are able to program apps into your phone that can steal bits of your data and track your information, personal messages. Actually, Bezos was one of these people that were in a giant scandal over that. I think he owns some type of giant newspaper, but some rare prince or who,
Washington Post, I think.
yeah, some I forgot who it was that hacked into his phone, but was trying to get all his information out there, all by sending him a video link and
The
click on all.
Saudi government
Yeah,
with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. I may have got the name wrong there. It's true. They were trying to hack into him because his newspaper had published things that were not too flattering for that particular government.
Yeah. So when we get into this part where it's like when we talk about misinformation, we talk about information in general. I mean, if he was reporting real information, but it was seen as like a slander and one government didn't like that, they could just take it down. I mean, it gets to this point now where I think you have a large amount of people that really just distrust anything that happens to do with social media. I'm probably one of those people, but also anything to do with our devices, which kind of seems to be the one that burns off the bridge when it comes to connecting people to putting technology inside of their body. Now, the only way I can see of introducing this in there where people can actually accept it and really enjoy the technology that's coming is if we do put it far away, much like when they're doing renewable energies, they'll do something in another country to get you your energy. You don't see it, so you don't have to worry about giant turbines being in your face or something like that, but they'll do it in a place where there's not a lot of people, so you never really notice it, but you still get your energy. Then you just let people know, they go, oh, that's cool if you do it away from me. Now we can start with that when it comes to medical advances. Much as people don't like technology in their body, when they're dying, they're more than happy to accept anything. So you get to this point where that might be a good introduction stage. I'm just curious to where there are ethical concerns that come with smartphones, the ethical concerns that come with data or protection privacy issues, or anything that happens to do with technology that we're suffering with kind of today when it comes to our sensitivity about our information, or our sensitivity of our credit cards, or sensitivity of our whatever you want to say. Do these ethical problems that happen over here, are they good road marks to be able to determine what maybe some problems you might face with incorporating technology into your life more like in your body?
Absolutely. These are important questions. There is a growing techlash, backlash against the power of big tech companies. There is a growing concern that people's personal foibles or characteristic differences will be used against us. We already get adverts served to us, as you pointed out, that can capitalize on our weaknesses. They know the right time of the day to send a particular message to us to make us buy the things that we probably shouldn't buy, or vote for candidates or for election results, which we probably shouldn't vote for. So that we are being increasingly manipulated, and people are rightly alarmed. And there is all kinds of malware which can mislead us and can take our data and be held against us. And the companies that can do the best job in protecting the users from such misuse of technology are the ones that are likely to flourish in the future. You know, in the last 20 years, it was the companies that didn't just bring technology, but they could make technology usable that pulled ahead of the pack. So user design became a big topic. Well, in the same way, in the next 10 years or so, it's going to be the companies that can demonstrate clear trustworthiness. So it's going to be trusted engineering as well as user experience engineering that's going to make a difference. And how do we know whether we can trust these companies or not? And it's a hard question. And it's going to require things like open source or ways in which people can study the algorithms and study the software that's used and can give it a thumbs up endorsement. So in the UK, we've got something called the kite mark. It's a stamp that goes onto various consumer goods to show that they've been audited and they meet certain standards. There will be in the future, I think, accreditation for the algorithms and software that we use. And we're all going to learn not to cut corners and go cheap and get stuff that doesn't have this accreditation, because we will hear plenty of stories of people having bad experiences as a result. So this is going to take time to build up, but we shouldn't let it last too long. We're going to need to hurry it up, because unless there is confidence in this technology, people won't use it and they won't get the benefits of it. And there are huge benefits to be had from, in due course, having various bits of technology, not just in our pockets or in our wrists with smart watches, or indeed on our skins, smart tattoos, but to actually have things embedded in our bodies, quite large things, the size of a small grain of rice, which many people have implanted in them. It does some relatively simple tasks today, but in the future there will be nanobots, which are quite similar, if you like, to vaccines. And people were understandably nervous about what side effects there might be from vaccines. People will, in the same way, be nervous about the side effects from nanobots. But when they see the benefits that will result, when you see one of your friends and you think, gosh, you're looking good, you're looking much younger, you're going to say, how did you do it? And instead of saying, well, I went on a yoga retreat or I've changed my diet, they will say, well, I've taken this infusion of nanobots. And you're going to be curious and you're going to want some of that for yourself too. And you're going to check out how trustworthy it is. And if it does check out, you'll be using it too.
Would it be full transparency, like a lot of people want, which would be to decipher the information out for themselves? But here's where we talk about people understanding the algorithms or being able to see the algorithms to kind of make the information or choice for themselves, for instance. People aren't going to want to give up full user control. And honestly, if you really want this perfect kind of idea of what transhumanism should be, I feel like humans need to give up that perfect control. As much as we want to incorporate technology inside of our bodies, we want full control of it. The issues or complications you see with today's technology happen to be when people have full control of a device. Look at all like the selfish stuff that people do with their devices. Well, we talk about stealing other people's data or other informations. We can point at the companies that did it, like this company, like Google, is stealing our information. Yeah, but who runs the company? That's the thing, is like you got to think there's personal intent with everything. And I feel like when you start getting into this place where people are going to have questions of, I want to be in control of this device that I'm putting inside of my body. I still want to feel like I control my brain, even though most of it's machine. Yeah, but to stop the government, I don't see, this is the issues I start talking about. I always think of the ethical stuff because I always know people are more than happy to ruin a bad thing on accident. We don't try and do it purposefully all the time, but a lot of times it ends up happening. If you have something control your brain, for instance, like a Neuralink, let's talk about that. What stops a corporation from controlling that? Or what stops a person from wanting full user experience of it and then using it in the worst possible way? I mean, there's really two bad options there. And the only positive option is to have someone who has, we have ethical committees that are able to monitor this stuff and be able to implement good rules and strategies and watch over people with their best interest at heart. But I mean, money funding, corporations funding. I look at it like, who's going to be the company that starts installing all these devices? I don't like Elon Musk even talking about a Neuralink, because as much as he might seem like a hero for buying Twitter, I still can't get over the aspect of like, when does money not play an issue in what people are going to do? And when it comes to a personal experience, I mean, do we let people carve out their own path with technology? Because I don't think we've done that correctly either. So should it be guided? No, I don't know. There's like, for me, there's a standstill option where I'm like, I see no healthy relationship that we can do with this, because I know people and I know people how they control technology. I mean, I don't know if you share these fears with me, or maybe it's just me. I'm starting to like the idea of technology, but honestly, I think the relationship we've developed with it is not necessarily beneficial to our own life in some aspects. Yeah, we can use AI for things, but I mean, how long does something new last before it really turns into something bad? I mean, it's very, very difficult to not raise ethical concerns with something like this. I'm not really worried about the transhumanism movement. I'm more worried about just our relationship with technology. We're going to do something to make our lives easier. It's always for personal gain. It's always for money. It's always for, I don't know, maybe a laziness factor. People get Alexa to ask it the weather because they don't feel like looking it up on their phone. I mean, these are issues I see. I don't know what your stance is.
So I think people are complicated. I think somebody like Elon Musk is complicated. I think he has a mixture of emotions, a mixture of motivations, rather, a mixture of emotions as well, surely. I don't think he's just driven by making more money for himself. I think he is driven in part by desires to avoid problems of runaway climate change, hence his advocacy for solar power and for electric cars. And his Neuralink has the potential to help people who are severely paralyzed, people whose spinal cord is injured or there's some other problem with their anatomy doesn't, which means they can't control their limbs. And that is a very strong, powerful motivation to allow people to regain their control by routing some of the signals from the brain to their exoskeleton or to their own limbs. So there are powerful positive motivations in there. I know quite a few people who are senior positions in big tech, and I describe them similarly as being complicated. In part, they have a strong desire to go down in history as humanitarians. They have a strong desire to actually improve the quality of people's lives. But at the same time, they are dependent on the funding from shareholders. They are dependent on society, which puts various constraints on them. And sadly, one of the constraints we have in society is we measure companies by their share price. And their share price goes up when it is expected they will deliver profits in due course. We also look at economic metrics such as GDP, the gross domestic product. And if that's going down, we all say, oh, bad news, it's terrible. What we need, therefore, is to replace these purely economic metrics of progress with things that put a more focus on all aspects of human well-being, including people's self-reported happiness level, or comfort level, or uh, uh, mental well-being level, including measures of education, including measures of equality, including measures whether people are feeling alienated. So all of these things should be discussed more widely instead of it just being the gross domestic product. And more companies should be measured by how well they're doing on that aspect rather than just on the purely financial aspect. So we need to take back control there. Now, you said earlier you thought individuals need to keep their own full control over the technology they're using. One thing I have to say is that nobody has got full control of what we're doing. Our bodies are falling to pieces. Our minds are misled all the time. So we don't have a full control. And the best we can do is to try and figure out what should we give up in order to have the best chance of having control in the matters that are most important.
Well, what I was saying is what stops people from wanting full control. I don't think they should have full control at all. Mostly because I know people are going to want to try and do whatever, because you only get to a point. It's like you were talking about a minute ago with Elon Musk. Now, he probably, I'm not saying he's a bad guy at all, but how many restraints can other corporations or other government entities put up until he starts to play ball? You know, you have a rogue person that owns a giant Twitter company. What do? They make a disinformation board. Now, I've never known the government wants to be out for anybody's best interest except their own. So you get into this land of, okay, what guardrails are they going to put up? Well, they start monitoring Elon Musk more. They have a bunch of people, celebrities, that start speaking out saying, I don't think Elon Musk should own Twitter, to where Elon Musk puts up a tweet saying, if I die in unforeseen circumstances, just know that I love you all. Something, it might be funny, it might be a joke, but you start realizing is if you're a corporation that's starting out making very good technology and your personal goal is to set out to actually help the world, how long until you realize people aren't investing into you because you're not investing into the things they want you to invest in? You're sitting there going, I want to fix climate change. But all the people that reportedly on the news say they care about climate change really just want something that's going to make their company money. So they're going to look to the people that are going to be making technologies that they can use to make their company better than the others. So then you're not getting funding. So now you have to go, all right, we have to curb the climate change idea for a minute and let's start making a device we can put into virtual reality to really extend it out there. Now they've lost initial route of their original goal. And that is because these companies influence the market. We see companies influence studies. We see companies influence research. It happens all the time. So what about companies being maybe with good humanitarian ideas starting to be pushed into a corner where they can't act on those ideas that they initially wanted to, only because of corporations making it so difficult for them to survive? You know, that's where I talk about the personal thing, the user experience, the people wanting personal control over their own bodies rather than the technology. I don't see a direction of when in that area where we don't mess it up. You know, it really brings down to how powerful money is. Now, if we link it over to what you were describing, sounded like a social credit system to me in some sense, where we are measuring people's happiness and all this. That would be good if we cared actually about people's feelings, how people feel on an everyday level when it comes to maybe their depression issues, which get talked about in the news, but really never get focused on. But a lot of it just seems like talking. It doesn't really seem like it's actually doing or anything's being sustainably built to focus on those type of things. You know, we see more things when it comes to making a profit rather than the overall happiness of an actual person. So I think that whole layer or foundation that we're on right now, and it might just be the States, it might just be, I feel like it's everywhere though, there's not a general compassion or actual true empathy factor that gets measured in the basis of wealth than when we look at the factor of how much a dollar is or a pound, whatever you want to say. So these are just like thoughts that I have because I'm experiencing it much like you probably are, maybe in a different light, but the technology around us, there's a lot of very weird actions that calls onto the psychology of people when it comes to selfish intent, when it comes to profit motivation. A lot of countries are built on the aspect of making a dollar. A lot of companies are built on the aspect of making a dollar. How do you not let a dollar sway your opinion when you're involving tech that might actually change the world? Where you start seeing the bad impression I was talking about earlier. My impression is that there's not really a way to fundamentally get this amazing technology into bettering our lives, only on a concept of there's way too much profit to gain from making it in the way that you want it to be made, rather than in the way that might actually benefit mankind.
So we've got to work at this. We get what we ask for repeatedly. If we only occasionally asked for safety and compassion, and the rest of the time we're asking for consumer profits, then we'll get consumer profits. So we need to put constant checks in place. We need to talk about these things, and we can back them up with legislation. So here's an example. Let's look at driving cars. Cars can do a lot of good. They can help us to get from one place to another, can help us to transport things, but we have had to accept various rules in how we use our cars. We don't let people decide how much alcohol they can drink before they get in a car. We don't trust them and say, well, it's their own judgment. We say, look, if there is more than a certain percentage of alcohol in your blood, it's an offense. We don't let people decide how fast they can drive their cars beyond a certain limit. And we monitor. And people know all the time that if they drive too fast, there's a chance they're going to get a speeding ticket and points on their license. So in a simple way, we have made cars a lot safer. We have government has mandated various safety features to be put into cars. You're far too young to remember, but there was a huge argument over whether safety belts, the wearing of safety belts would be mandated or not. And people complained, oh, I'll lose my freedom if I have to put on this safety belt. Then guess what? It turns out that when we're all wearing safety belt, there are many fewer fatalities. And we have to spend less on repairing people who have been badly damaged. And so, yeah, we accept this constraint. And the companies who made cars also had to do things like stop putting lead in petrol, because although it was sort of initially it was thought to boost the economic performance, it turns out that lead in the environment has a bad effect on people's IQ. And actually, it turns out that when states made leaded petrol illegal, the crime rates 20 years later in many of these states went down because there were fewer people who had grown up in with lead in the air affecting how well they matured. So we can do things, and we need to do more of it. But we're not going to do more of it unless we have a serious ongoing discussion, which is exactly what you and I are doing now. And there needs to be a lot more of it.
Well, that's why I didn't want this to seem like I was coming off like just trying to knock down the whole idea of the futurist movement, because that's not what I'm doing. I've just, whenever I look this topic up, I see way too much positive, like, yeah, we can use this technology. We can use this technology. I'm like, but any viewer that's really thinking about this is honestly thinking about the ethical concerns that come with it and the direction of where it's going to go. Because I mean, that's what's important to talk about first. We can, in this discussion, get to all the crazy, because I mean, fixing somebody's spinal cord with micro technology, or being able to get someone with like a hearing issue, being able to perfect hearing, being able to fix vision in so many sense. There's so many amazing benefits of it. But there's just this aspect to it where how do we not get off that? How do we not lose track of progress into actually making people's lives better? And it comes with talking about it. It comes with passing legislation on a lot of things as well too. Now, much like anybody, I like my freedoms, but at the same time, it does come with a price. And I think you have to talk about that. It's like with the internet. The internet, when it was established, if they knew how powerful it was going to be like it is today, they probably would have put more of a payment thing on it, or they would have put more restrictions on it for sure. But they opened it up with a free base thing and then started updating it later. It's kind of like a game. If you buy a game now, they'll release a game, you'll pre-order it, whatever, you get it. Then they're like, oh, we have to patch this, you have to patch that, you have to update this and update that. The game's not fully complete, really. I'm on a game where I'm 99% complete and I can't beat the 1% because they haven't put out a patch to fix the one character that doesn't pop up for me to finish the game. But that's how they get you. They just want the money. How do we make sure that doesn't happen with this type of thing? I feel like before its initial release, before you get people used to it, because eventually you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be like Luddites, like myself, in a sense, where they're going to be, no, 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 I don't want any of that. But eventually they'll adapt. Eventually they'll get used to it. It's just like with iPhones. Everyone loved, tapping that button 3 times to send a text message. And now we have touch screens where you can do it without tapping a button 3 times. You just type in whatever you want or say what you want, and it'll send the message away. You get used to it. So before we release this type of technology, or before we even talk about ideas of innovating or something like that, it's got to start off somewhere else where it's not going to be fully influenced into people's lives. Because then when you introduce a technology like nanobots, let's talk about my favorite aspect, cell regeneration. Let's get it to where you can get a cut. You have little micro nanotechnology. It's able to heal that cut 1,000 times faster. If you have that, that needs to be with specific cases where you're doing experimental studies on that type of technology before you start incorporating it in every single hospital. That means don't even make a news broadcast about it, because then people are going to want it and it might not be ready yet. You might not have the regulations fully funneled out. And next thing you know, you start seeing it go down a really bad course. I feel like with everything of this type of technology or these types of talks, you hear a lot of people bragging about how amazing the technology is going to be. I like that. I like to hear what the positive aspects of it are, but you give people, it's like brainwashing a bunch of people only about the good stuff about things. And I go, then when they use it and they realize that there's some flaws in it, they have a lot more to complain about. So you need to talk about everything when it comes to these aspects so people don't get a bad impression from it right off the bat. You start broadcasting a person that's able to have technology that heals his cuts or heals his skin or do whatever this, people go, oh my God, I could just be careless with my life now. And then they realize, no, the technology isn't like that, but they showed you a really good video. This happened like 4 or 5 months ago. Boston Dynamics made an amazing human robot looking thing. Everyone, the hashtag that was trending was Skynet. That's because they didn't show you the steps of how it got up there. They showed you this amazing 30-second, 1 minute video. And then people are expecting this technology to be everywhere. Well, it's been 5-6 months now. We don't have that technology in everybody's homes like people were expecting when they saw that. That's where it was going to go. Okay. But now people are like, and they forgot about it. So when you release something, you want to kind of come at it with, make sure all the little kinks or whatever are worked out of it. So people don't have a reason to raise a complaint, don't have a reason to raise an issue. So then we can actually see this technology progress, unlike we've seen with most other devices or other technologies that have been released, where people just constantly complain about Twitter, even though they're on Twitter tweeting that tweet about Twitter being crap. It's really weird how our minds work as humans. And I feel like we're more than happy to expect something to work. But when we know that technology has problems, we know that anything in the world has problems, people have problems, we're still shocked when there's that problem that arises. I mean, I'm not crazy in saying that. Like, that's kind of an important thing.
So I think politics has a big role to play here.
Everything does.
Politics can actually constrain and steer the market so the market behaves better. One of the things politics does is it has rules against abuse of monopolies. Sometimes companies are incredibly innovative when they're small and young and they do tremendous things and they get a market leadership position. And then when they've got that market leadership position, they stop focusing so much on serving the customers to win the customers from their competitors. They start thinking about how they can get more and more money from their customers, and they can abuse their position of power. Well, the US has got antitrust laws going back to the 1880s and so on. It broke up big oil, it broke up big steel, it broke up big railways to avoid this. And it's done the same in more recent history, breaking up various technology companies. And there are rules preventing what companies can do with positions of great power. After all, here's one of the most pertinent quotes: power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. First said by the 19th century politician and historian Lord Acton. And that's how it is. Even great people can start doing bad things if you get too much power. And so we need to prevent too much power coming into any company's hands or any individual's hands. which is probably why it would be a bad idea for Elon Musk to have too much power over Twitter, despite his mix of good motivations and perhaps more questionable motivations. So I wouldn't want him to have so much power. I don't like Mark Zuckerberg has so much power over Facebook, which is the means by which so many people find out news. So governments, and they've got problems of their own, of course, and we might talk about the faults and flaws in politics, but there has been some good historical examples of governments constraining technology and guiding companies for the betterment of everyone. Just one more example goes back to the time in the early industrial revolution when more and more young children were employed in factories. Why did they use young children? Because they were small, they had very nimble fingers, and they could do things that grown-ups couldn't do. And children as young as 6, 7, 8 were working long hours in the factories. And some people said, well, it's good for them because otherwise they'd be idle. But even the factory owners themselves were unhappy about it. But some of the factory owners said, I don't like doing this, but unless we do this, we're going to be outcompeted by our competitors. So some of the factory owners lobbied Parliament. They said, you've got to make it a law to stop companies doing this. And by the way, you've got to put inspectors in place. And so there were factory inspectors that went round to ensure that children weren't there or weren't there for long hours, and instead the children were going to school. So it was the constraint of politics that steered the evolution of factories into a more humane place.
If I could give you the technology and the money possible to create the vision you want to create, where would you first funnel in this type of futuristic thinking or this type of futuristic technology? Which, like, because I'm already thinking like we start talking about incorporating it in government. I'm not talking about political candidates, but I'm talking about how many people complain about a pothole in a road. Now, imagine if you made a type of material. You mentioned steel factories earlier. Imagine a type of material that's created with some type of nanotechnology that can self-repair itself, and you make it into a road, much like they're talking about with these Teslas of having an electric road or something like that, where these cars can drive on it and they power up as they go. You wouldn't have to stop at a station. If you had a road that could fix itself, not made of concrete, but made out of some nanotechnology, you would have a lot of more people, I guess, maybe that are traveling complain less about a pothole in a road, even though not even 5, maybe 10 years ago, they were so happy that that highway was built. You know, people like the initial rollout of things, but maintaining their happiness in a sense. How do we get that happiness maintained if we have a technology that is self-repairing, self-perfecting, where human, I guess, oversight really can't do? I mean, the biggest example of the biggest human errors are from oversight issues. We have nuclear factories that are 30 something years past due. Is that a laziness factor? I don't know. But if you had nanotechnology that's fixing those holes or fixing those errors or fixing those updates, conditions of your car, for instance, we talk about transport, autonomous vehicles. I've talked to plenty of people on the show that have worked in that field. Talk about fully autonomous is 50, 60 years down the line. I don't think it's that far out. I think if you really start trying to find the things that perfect the system, maybe AI could help cure a lot of the problems that we can't figure out yet. I mean, they're using AI and robotic and programmatic simulations to be able to detect the origin of how the Big Bang started just by problematic simulations that keep recurring over and over and over again. Well, use AI to figure out a way to use technology for the best aspects of our life. You know, this idea that I used to be so think was so stupid, but Mick West brought it up to me, which was that the true utopian is that people don't have to work; they can do whatever they want. And I go, yeah, but you're going to have people that still want to work, that just they need that work. Then we saw it with lockdowns; people just wanted to go to their job, and then they'll complain about it when they start working again. To think that robots couldn't take over all of our industrial factories or any of these types of things to progress our material, I think we can look at it as a way of like, I don't want to lose my job, but imagine if you didn't really have to pay your bills. Imagine if we lived in this type of land or this world where it seems so impossible right now, but we can get there if we tried, where you wouldn't have to worry about an electric bill or something coming in because we had a more renewable energy source. We had these types of methods that would be all hammered and perfected or whatever. And that all comes from the fault of user control. We've wanted to maintain the steering wheel for a very long time. And sadly, we don't have one person leading that ship. We have a million people that are jerking at the wheel whenever they see something that they like. And I don't necessarily want one person ruling either, but I don't think it should be in the hands of man to make the decisions for man. I don't necessarily know if it's the hand of technology that does that. I think people look to this UFO phenomena or something like that, and they think this is what's going to unite us. Is it? Is that a hope to that you want to put all your chips on? Or can we look at something that we are making giant strides towards, and that is technology? Maybe it's not technology leading the path for us. Maybe it's not human leading the path of technology for them. Maybe it's an aspect of an inner working relationship that is actually perfected to a point where we can balance out our own ecosystems. I mean, is that crazy in saying that? I don't think it's really that crazy.
Lots of big points there as well.
I saw you got the pen out. You're writing stuff down. I'm guessing what I'm saying.
I am, yes.
Or you're like, this guy's crazy.
Not at all. I've written down 5 answers to your question as to what I would do if lots of money was available. I've written out other things as well. But what you're talking about there is what can unite humanity so that we actually get together and work on what's most important rather than fighting each other over relatively petty things. And people have actually studied what makes change initiatives succeed and fail. People have looked at many people's attempts, many businesses' attempts to turn themselves around, and most big change attempts do fail. They go nowhere, lots of money was wasted, and people have actually figured out a few core points. The first thing is a lack of a sense of urgency. People say, well, this is sort of interesting, but I'm busy just now. It's not urgent enough to change what you're doing. So there has to be a real sense of urgency. And if there was a threat from UFOs, not that I believe that's going to happen, but if there was a threat, that might pull us all together. But there are threats facing us. There are threats of runaway climate change. There are threats of Cold War 2.0 becoming a hot war with accidental or maybe semi-deliberate use of nuclear weapons. There are risks of greater bioweapons. The kinds of problems we got from COVID today could be nothing compared to specially engineered viruses that some depressed, alienated, angry people might create. And there's the threat of artificial intelligence itself going rogue in various ways. So some of these threats could unite us, and I think they are urgent. But you need more than just a, wow, this is important. We need to get together urgently. You need to have a clear, positive vision as well. And unless there's a clear, positive vision, people say, well, what can we do? Yeah, it's terrible, but well, there's nothing we can do, is there? And then their horizons shrink again and they focus. So I have set out in various books like this here, Sustainable Superabundance, a Universal Transhumanist Invitation, some of the answers as to what that life could be like. The life in which, as you said, most people wouldn't work. And what would they do instead? Well, we should be engaged. We should be working, but not working for money. We are working on projects that really inspire us. You're doing this now, not particularly because you're going to earn lots of money. You might earn some money from advertising clicks, I don't know, but you're doing it out of a passion that this is an important set of conversations. And other people can have passions and causes and quests to work on as well. So that's what the future will be. It's an abundance of time for creativity, as well as an abundance of health and so forth. So we need to clarify that vision. And I would, to answer your question, what would I spend money on? I could point to various bits of technology and we could discuss them later. But the most important thing I'll come back to is improving the education of people all around the world in future possibilities. If more people were turned on to the possibilities, the good possibilities and the bad possibilities, and when I mean say good, I mean very good, and when I say bad, I mean very bad. We are on a precipice, as various people have talked about, where we could teeter either in one direction or another. Once more people understand that, more people will say, well, how can they get involved? And there'll be lots more money which is unleashed, not to be spent in relatively frivolous causes, but to be spent on the things that would practically make a difference, like dealing with aging. Most people get ill because their bodies are aging in various ways. If you look at when do people get cancer or heart disease, or when do people have a serious encounter with COVID, it's exponentially increases depending on how old we are, and that depends on how much damage has happened in our bodies as a result of our lives. If we spent more money on rejuvenation biotechnologies, we would undo this damage. And so somebody could be 60 years old chronologically, but they could have the quality of health in their body of a 25-year-old. And then the risks of cancer and dementia and heart disease and COVID would be much less, so on. So that's one thing. And I could list others where I think lots of money should be invested. But the way that money will be invested is if many more people wake up to the possibilities. So the real answer to your question is, let's improve education.
When it comes to, like you mentioned, the anti-aging topic, what stops people from abusing their own bodies only because they feel comfortable with the safety net that technology will be able to fix any problems that they have? I talked about like people's ideas, like we're not good as a human species. We're not good with problems that are very long, like environmental problems, other things that are like, oh, it's going to be in the next 20 years, next 30 years, next 40 years, next 50 years. Those are long problems. We're like fourth quarter people. We fix right at that last minute, right when that buzzer's about to bounce, we start acting quick. But I start to wonder, why don't we take initiative earlier? And I think it's because of that aspect of, if we find out that the world's going to end tomorrow and we have a bunch of people drastically trying to figure out how to fix the problem today and they don't figure it out, they go, well, we did the best we could in the time that we had. It seems like there's always an excuse when people talk about issues with their body or stuff like that. The only time you don't see excuses is when someone's dying of lung cancer and they've spent the past 70 years of their life or whatever smoking cigarettes a pack a day. When they go, you see, if you would have stopped smoking, they're like, I had fun with my life. That's the only time when they know that they've made their own destruction, that they're comfortable with what happened, not blaming it or taking it out on something else. Everyone kind of looks to point their finger at something, whether it's like, oh, it's climate change that's doing this, or oh, it's this president that's doing that, or it's this and that. I start looking to this thing of like, maybe you would have, if you had an AI technology, I like that direction of AI doing stuff. But when you have AI that's created and it starts advancing and fixing a lot of issues, does it make it so comfortable to where people can abuse the hell out of their lives knowing there's a safety net behind them? Or does it get to this point where people be afraid of something that seems so advanced they want to shut it down, like you see in a lot of AI discussions of super artificial intelligence? I go, you I can fix one of those, I think. One of those is, if you incorporate technology in somebody's body, then they don't feel so alienated away from the AI technology. They don't go, there's this artificial machine that's smarter than human life. Well, that is inside of your body as well too, so you really can't complain. You can kind of understand it. It's not like it's a different species taking over your species and making yours the second class. It's a technology that's also inside of your body, which means you are connected to that thing as well too. As much as it might be its own entity being, you still have a piece of that inside of yourself. Now, that's a fix to maybe one of the problems. But when we talk about the abuse factor with anything that we do, we see that with alcohol, but people don't complain about it because they chose to drink. You see that with cigarettes. People chose to smoke. When you have a technology saying we can reverse your liver by 30 something years, that technology will be in 2 years' time. You have one dude who's dying of liver failure already drinking another bottle saying, well, in 2 years, I can make it that long. You have people that are going to end up blaming the technology that you've now created to make longer life last longer only because they can now.
So why do people abuse themselves in such a way? Why
It's
do
fun.
people eat the wrong food or smoke the wrong uh, drugs, including tobacco, or drink the wrong things? And you say it's fun, but there are other ways in which people can experience fun. Some of the most joyous people are various Buddhist monks who don't partake in any of these things. So I think we have to look not just at our physical health, which needs to be improved, but we need to look at our social health and our mental health. And there is a crisis in mental health. Far too many people, especially young people, are committing suicide. If you look at what causes people to die between the ages of something like 15 and 35, I think suicide is right up there as one of the leading causes of death. People still commit suicide at roughly the same rate later in life, but by that stage, other things are killing people more. And even if people don't kill themselves because of mental ill health, we do all kinds of bad things to ourselves as a result. So fixing our mental health has got to be at least as important as fixing our physical health. And why do people do things? Why do we do things to ourselves that aren't in our best interests? In part, the environment influences us. We get misled by consumerism. We also get pressured by poor experiences in our lives. Why do people end up with so-called deaths of despair? In part, it's because their lives have been despairing. They have lost their economic future. They imagine, they feel they're not getting the respect that is their due. So there's part of changing the social environment so that more people have what they perceive as a fair share of the fruits of abundance of technology. And also, there are things in our minds which we can improve, and we need to accelerate improving our minds with cognitech. So, at the same time as I would advocate spending lots of money to improve rejuvenation biotechnology, mainly with a view to fixing our physical selves, I also advocate accelerating the research into how people can have higher quality of mental well-being. And it's a combination of some traditional answers like meditation, like being in nature, like having a purpose in life and being surrounded by friends who are good to us. But it also can be improved by various substances, whether it is psychedelics or so called nootropics and other things we can do to our brain to put our brains into better moods and lessen the pressures for us to damage ourselves by destructive habits and tendencies.
When we talk about incorporating technology to fix our mental health, don't you see that a lot of the depression that people might also suffer from is the aspect of how we've used technology to create that mental health? And I don't think the devices are the issue. I just think it's the way that we tend to use them. Seems like human error again. Now, I was going to bring up this earlier about maybe creating an artificial village or an artificial city or something like that where the trees are made of some type of nanotechnology, but they look and feel and smell just like a real tree does. Now, if we talk about our environment, for instance, I know I still don't understand why so many transhumanist people are like they always talk about Buddhism. I guess it relates somewhere. There's a lot of people that are transhumanists that talk about Buddhism. Maybe you can explain that in a minute. But with artificial villages, for instance, man, if people need the environment or need nature, which I think is definitely a mood booster, would it still feel the same if it was an artificial created thing and you knew that in your subconscious or if you knew that in your consciousness? Now, you did mention an aspect when it does incorporate into our mental well-being. I don't really examine the depression part, even though I understand that's a huge issue, especially when it comes to it starts at 17 years old when people start having suicidal thoughts. But mostly it's men are more effective at it. Effective meaning that they actually carry through the deed, but more women actually attempt suicide. Um, but when it comes to brain damage, that's where you're going to see the technology take off. Look what they're calling COVID now. People who have long COVID, they're starting to realize is brain damage. People that still can't smell, brain damage. People that have brain fog, like myself, brain damage. You start wondering what that is. Is it something that's like little tiny scars on your brain or little tiny markings or neurons that aren't firing off properly? Let's examine it with schizophrenia. You're able to fix those neurons. You're being able to help some way to help those impulses go through to where you can function and feel like you're yourself again, not something that you might have, I don't know, lost. That's a fix right there. I feel like you have a lot of people right now that we can talk about inequality issues, sure, but I don't think it's the gender inequalities. I don't think it's a race inequalities types things. Not saying that those aren't happening, but I'm saying what I think it is that this idea that people don't feel like they're being treated the same as another person, that an overall thing. And people go, well, that's a race issue. It's like, no, it's not just that. There are people that feel like their lives have been cheated from them because they see other people that are more successful. Now, how do we get everyone on the same playing field? That's a little bit more of a difficult problem to tackle. But when I talked to David Pierce, he said about this raising, I think it's the Hermetic scale or something like that, of this type of thing of raising everybody's sensors or something like that to where they
He
feel.
calls it hedonic scale.
Yes. So when he talked about that, I mean, in a sense, isn't that not putting everybody on the same playing field? That's kind of raising everybody up to the same standards. And I feel like that's what you get a lot of. You have people that suffer something in their life and they might take it out on somebody else that ruins their life. Now, it's very, very hard to try and balance out everyone's emotional well-being. And I don't think there's a type of therapy. I don't think there's a form of meditation. I don't think there's a religion aspect that can really do that. But technology might be able to help in that sense. It's just about, if we're going to tackle the problem with mental well-being, I think it needs to be with more of an actual disease or something that people are going to be more than happy to fund, then focus on the depression aspect. Because to me, a depression aspect, it's it's a good goal. It's just not where I would like it to start. You know what I mean? Like I have depression. I know what that's like. Some days really suck and some days really suck. But you can't really say we're just going to fix depression with this, because then people are going to go, well, why isn't my depression fixed? Oh, the technology didn't do its job right. Well, it's just a junk thing that they sold me. They always promise something but they never fulfill. We'll start with schizophrenia. Starts with something that has not had any cure or anything besides a pill to be able to numb your symptoms. Most people don't have schizophrenia. It's a small portion. So you're not upsetting everyone. You're just telling these people that have no cure right now that we're going to try. So they can't be mad at you for taking a shot. But when people have depression and you offer an antidepressant, you have more people complaining about the antidepressants because now they didn't balance out the hormonal functions of a teenager that gets put on an antidepressant, then wonders why at the age of whatever, 30 or 29 or whatever, he can't get his heart on because he's been using antidepressants, which their side effect is that. So you start getting to this point of like, maybe we fix something where we're just taking a shot. It's like trying to solve the environmental issue. You can look at any way to solve the environmental issue when it comes to renewable energies. There's like 10 of them. But when you're just like, I'm going to see how far I can get with this, someone can say, well, that's stupid. I'm going to go this way. Yeah, but you're all taking a shot. I mean, at least you have 10 horses in the race rather than just one. You know what I mean? So if you look at an aspect of curing schizophrenia first or curing long COVID, whatever, being able to incorporate nanotechnology or some type of thing into somebody's brain, you're not like taking away, you're not going to make them worse. You know what I mean? You're just only going to try and solve the issue. But when you talk about depression, there's so much with that that can lead to you're going to make it worse, mostly because people are going to feel a lot of hate and resentment when you don't fix the problem they expect you to fix.
So first thing to say is I don't want to sound simplistic on this. I don't want to suggest there is a pill which is around the corner, which is going to fix everybody's mental health issues and then raise us up to higher levels. I think it's much more complicated than that. You're entirely right to say that people differ, and the kinds of mental health that afflict one person may be quite different from the kinds of mental health that afflict somebody else. And each treatment has the potential for side effects. It's the same, of course, with physical drugs, drugs for physical ailments. Some people react to different drugs in different ways. Some people need to avoid certain painkillers. Some people need to avoid certain antibiotics. So you've got to find out more about the person and prescribe personalized medicine rather than just blanket one size fits all medicine. And it's the same with our mental health. Now, I do think technology will help. I think technology will be an important part of fixing our addictions and our wrong tendencies. Some of the tendencies we've got made sense, by the way, in earlier evolutionary times when we lived in smaller groups and when it was actually important for us to be able to deceive each other. It was quite an important asset that you could deceive other people, and it was also important that you could figure out who was deceiving whom, and you could pretend that you didn't know, but you actually did know. That's not a very flattering picture of Homo sapiens, but this seems to be at least part of why our brains grew so large, because we were very good at juggling all this gossip in our brains. And why are we fascinated by gossip? It's because we figure out who knows what about whom and who's doing what to who and who knows about it. So some of these tendencies made sense in different, simpler circumstances when things were shorter term. But in the crises we face today with global issues such as runaway climate change and nuclear weapons, we need different characteristics. and we need to apply whatever we can to fix us. And I look forward to us having guardian angels in our brains. The headset I'm wearing today doesn't speak to me, it's just conveying what you say. But in the future, I expect there will be a kind of intelligence that's a bit like the intelligence that operates when I'm typing an email and it shows me I've mistyped a word, I've misspelt it, or it suggests the completion of what I thought of what words I've typed already. In the not too distant future, it's going to be giving me advice. David, it's time to stop talking now. You've talked too long, and don't get too excited about this. And it's going to feed information in me, a bit like a very good friend can do. Sometimes friends offer each other advice which goes down badly because it's not presented in the best way at the best time. But a really good friend will know how to give us advice in a way that we're grateful for and makes us inspired and makes us hopeful. So that's the possibilities of technology. It will just tell us in the right way, hey, you don't need to eat this. Have you considered eating this instead? And it will do it in a way that helps us enjoy whatever more healthy food we could be eating. And it will guide us away from saying things which are hurtful or spiteful into ways that will promote a constructive, collaborative, positive conversation.
You just explained the voice of depression, except it does it in the opposite way of how you described it. The voice of depression is more like, "What are you doing, you piece of shit? Why don't you get moving?" And it's like these critical hits onto your psyche I mean, I'm not going to lie, I probably wouldn't be as motivated or as cranking out as much podcast episode if I didn't have that side to me. So in a way, you can use it to a benefit. It's kind of like Mike Tyson. You don't want kids' childhoods to be shit, but at the same time, it did produce a Mike Tyson where he talks about he needed those moments in his life to really get himself motivated. Now, if you can hijack that depression voice, and instead of having intrusive thoughts about suicide or depression or things about your life that are critical that you are over analyzing in a sense, imagine you could turn it to a more positive voice, or instead of saying jump off this cliff, you say, hey, why don't we go get an ice cream? Why don't we go do this? I mean, it's that I wouldn't even say that's not really simplistic. It's probably extremely complicated, but saying it like that when you're able to kind of decipher, I mean, how many people have thoughts inside of their heads? Now, I'm not saying we create something that is like kind of like talking to an imaginary friend. Like we don't want to have that there 24/7, but we can, maybe some people do, but just like how some people you can choose to go online and talk to an AI robot and have a conversation with it. You can have this voice where if you do have an intrusive thought, it can turn it into a more positive, creative one. So instead of lighting up the part where that intrusive thought might spark in the brain, we light up another part where it spark up creativity in your brain. And much like someone that goes, I'm not feeling too happy right now, I'm going to go paint, and they start painting. Maybe it could be something that hijacks that type of thing or reroutes it to increase that area of making you want to be more productive and funnel out your creativity with emotion.
So certain amounts of stress are good for us. I don't want to get out of a world with stress, but certain types of stress are just too much. They're overwhelming. They are distress. Even a little bit of distress is possibly useful, but it's when it becomes overwhelming that it's destructive. And so we need to figure out ways to keep ourselves and the people we care about in a positive window when there's not too much stress and not too little stress. And it keeps us motivated, keeps us going along. And that's the future I envision when we're in this state of heightened consciousness and we are moving forwards the whole time.
Now you see we're tilting towards the more positive now. So here's another one for you. Diabetics, automatic insulin dispenser, much like they have the little pumps or something on the side of their their actual side. Imagine if you had something inside that was like little nanobots that could actually help fix or maybe correct a lot of those issues. Might take a couple of months that these little bots inside of you, but they're able to release insulin until somehow it can create more sustainability for your body to help produce it. Maybe it's healing a liver function or healing some type of pancreatic function. Also, has there ever been any talks about like reviving people from the dead with types of technology? Like, for instance, I know people talk about like Frankenstein being like a folklore or myth or some type of fairy tale type thing. I'm like, but there's been plenty of accounts of people trying to reanimate dead bodies before. I wonder if technology, is there a point where we'll be able to reanimate maybe something? I guess we have to look ethical concerns, not something that's like 5 years dead, but maybe something when it comes to not, I wouldn't say even transcendence, but someone just died, got hit by a car, and you have some type of technology that's able to repair or at least restore organ function to a point where you can get them to a hospital in time? I mean, is that far out? It doesn't seem like it's that far out.
We are already doing that. We have the ability to bring people back from the dead in the sense that their heart has stopped. In olden days, if your heart was stopped, that was that. There was no way to bring you back. But we learned about heart massage, CPR, and many people are alive today who in olden times would have been dead and gone because we were able to stimulate their hearts. And there are these other systems that are around that can apply electrical shocks to restart it. So we're doing that already. And increasingly, we'll be able to put people into a state of suspended animation at very low temperature. So they will die. There was nothing we could do to save them at that time. But rather than letting the whole body deteriorate, which would happen if you put them in a grave in the ground or burn them up in a furnace, we put them into this deep, low temperature suspension.
That's
And then
cryonics, right?
that's cryonic.
Cryonics.
That's
Yeah.
exactly so. That's what's called cryonics. And in the future, we'll know how to fix whichever disease was causing them problems. It's a bit like we have better cures for diabetes now than we had before. And in the future, we'll have better cures for sickness. You know, the bubonic plague, Black Death, killed enormous numbers. But we're not too worried about studying corpses which were killed by bubonic plague these days because we have plenty of treatments for bubonic plague nowadays. We can't bring these corpses back to death, but if some of the viruses were reanimated, we would be, or bacteria, then we would be able to fix it. So we can increasingly cure diseases and we'll cure more diseases in the future. And so that's at that stage, we look forward to reanimating people by gently raising their temperature again and applying the cure. And so this is one of the worst things that's happening in society today. Far too many people are dying, and then we're giving away the chance to bring themselves back. We have available an ambulance to the future, if you like, but we're not taking advantage of that ambulance to the future. We just sort of, it's as if we were shrugged our shoulders and said, you know, I've had an accident, my family member is dying, but we're out here in the middle of the motorway, we're far away from a hospital, too bad. We say, of course not, let's get an ambulance, let's bring them to the hospital where there are treatments, there are people, there are equipment that can save them. Well, we now have an ambulance to the future, which is cryonic suspension, and far too many people are not taking use of that.
When we talk about taking the weapons out of our mindset, in the field of discussion of this type of technology or this type of future, how do you see that can be done? Because I see like younger generations coming up are a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more understanding, and kind of not wanting the war, not just in the States, it's everywhere. It's kind of like all these kids are kind of seeing a more of a care for the earth and more of a empathy to human life in some aspects. And some aspects we're kind of trash to each other, mostly when it comes to social media, but in real life, they'll never say that to someone. I think you can do it one of two ways. One would be to just show people the ultimate horrors that this type of thing can do. Much like launching a nuke. I mean, it didn't eliminate the nuke problem, but after like Nagasaki and all that, nobody really wanted to start a war after that. It was kind of like there was a long time period where I feel like now you just have people that kind of forgot, even though you can see the horrors of it. It's just too many generations disconnected. Or you show them the more beneficial aspect and never let them think about the weapon aspect. But there's still going to be that isolated few, those crazy, unstable type individuals that have those thoughts and introduce it into the world. I'm not talking about the producers of the company. I'm talking about the people that will use the technology for the worst possible aspects. And then also, third kind of question is, what about environmental hazards that aren't on this planet? When we talk about a solar flare, what stops it from destroying all of that technology? If you have something in your brain that is maybe fixing, you weren't able to fix in a genetic engineering lab, a kid's propensity to have autism or some type of birth defect, and then you fix it with technology later in their life, let's say a 30-year-old guy who has Tourette's or some type of severe autism, You make it so now they can speak and they can function and they can, do all these types of things. What stops a solar flare from erasing that ability with the technology you've just implanted into that person's body?
Well, the risk of a solar flare or an electromagnetic pulse damaging, destroying it is very real. In 1859, there was something called the Carrington event, which
Yeah.
was a massive solar flare did hit the Earth, and it wiped out the communications infrastructure of the time, which wasn't very advanced, but there were telegraph systems that were knocked out by that. If something similar were to happen today, trillions of dollars of damage would result. Thankfully, they don't happen all that often, but we need to watch out for them. I don't think we could stop one coming our way if we did see it coming. So we need to design more of our technology to be resilient. And there is some focus on resilience, but nothing like enough. So that's a big and important topic.
It's
We
called
could make ourselves so dependent on an infrastructure, and then when it goes down, we are stuck because we have forgotten how to handle things without that infrastructure being
you,
present.
you create a nano shield. It's where you put it up in the solar system, you launch something up there, and you have all these little nanobots that are. I mean, you could look at that in multiple ways. Bill Gates, I think, for a while wanted to launch a missile at the ozone layer to dissipate particles to dim the sun to help with climate change. He did that,
This
and I
is
think
called geoengineering. I don't think it tackles the ozone layer as such, but it's something that could be in the stratosphere. And you could put the equivalent of what happens after a massive volcano. Volcanoes put various chemicals called sulfides, I think, high into the stratosphere, which helps to reflect sunlight. So after the big eruption, I think it's in the Philippines, Mount Pinatubo, possibly about 1991, the average temperature of the Earth dipped nearly a whole degree Celsius for a year or two. So we might do something similar. But my goodness, there are side effects too. When there are such volcanic eruptions, it doesn't lower the temperature in a uniform way. So there are many parts of the earth that might experience floods or other disasters. So it has to be done carefully. Bill Gates hasn't said, let's go ahead and do it. What he said is, let's research it. And that's entirely right. More money should be put on researching geoengineering. And there's many possible geoengineering approaches, putting things in the stratosphere, putting things higher to reflect light, or putting things in the ocean to change how much CO2 the ocean absorbs. There are things that could be done, and each of them are dangerous, but each of them deserve investigation, and so we can figure out if we can do it safely. And so the environmental threats are real, and we need to address them. But I think the risks of damage to the earth are more in terms of what we humans do rather than what the universe might throw at us. Yes, asteroids do come our way every so often, but quite infrequently. Whereas the risks of the world being destroyed by nuclear war or by biopathogen or by rogue AGI are, most people estimate, who study this thing seriously, and there are people who study it, the existential risk specialists, they think it's about 100 or 1,000 times more likely we will be made extinct by a human caused problem than by something entirely astronomical. But we need to look after all of them. Now, to come back to your question, how do we help people to shy away from using weapons? And you talked about the shock that happened after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It did stimulate lots of scientists to say we must never use this for military intent again. And there was the Atoms for Peace initiative instead. Well, of course, that didn't stop large numbers of nuclear weapons spreading. And there is an interesting story, which I think is quite instructive for something that happened in the middle of the 1980s. So at that stage, the US president was Ronald Reagan, who had come to the presidency after spending many years of his life as a fervent anti-communist campaigner. He was very concerned about the ideology of Marxist-Leninism. He gave talks about it going back into the late 1950s, early 1960s. It was a real threat. And if we were not careful, the Soviet Union would send its missiles or send its forces to take over the West. So he was in the White House, and he developed something called, or rather his team developed something called Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, which was a different defensive system which sounds good in practice. Well, we've got a defensive system, but the threat is, well, if you've got better defense, you might be tempted into a first strike capability. So he was in the White House. In the Kremlin was a person called Mikhail Gorbachev, who had come to power, I think it's about 1984. And he had also inherited, what, 6 decades of rhetoric saying that the West were the dreadful enemy and there had to be a way of burying them, as his predecessor Nikita Khrushchev used to say. So the two were on a trajectory of potential greater nuclear weapons, more dangerous defensive postures, which counterintuitively might have made war more likely. And what stopped all this was a futurist. I call him a futurist. He's quite well known. Carl Sagan, a science educator. He did some research, real science, which talked about something called nuclear winter, which said that even if there was just a limited exchange of nuclear weapons, there was the risk that there would be something similar to what we spoke about a few minutes ago. Dust going high into the atmosphere, lowering the temperature of the Earth. And it wouldn't just be as if there was one volcano, which lowered the temperature of the Earth by 1 degree. It could lower it by 10 degrees or so. It could blot out all the light from the sun. It would cause all the vegetation to die. And it could cause the end of human experience, so-called nuclear winter, or there's other slight versions of it called nuclear autumn or nuclear fall, in which it would still be radical. And so the war planners, the battle planners, both in the Pentagon and in the Kremlin, looked at this analysis and they said, oh my goodness, this makes it more important that we avoid a nuclear war at all costs. Whereas previously, they had been looking at scenarios in which maybe tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of people might die. And they would say, that's bad, but at least it's not the end of the world. Now they saw it was the end of the world. So Carl Sagan's advocacy to raise the awareness of the threats of nuclear winter, which had not been understood before, people had said, well, if there's nuclear weapons, we might die of fire, but they hadn't thought they might die of ice as a result. And so that caused both Reagan and Gorbachev to be more open to a different kind of relationship. And the two of them hit it off. The two of them were both remarkable people, and they did manage to agree steps to denuclearize. They removed their intermediate range nuclear weapons from Europe. They reduced the size of their intercontinental ballistic missiles arsenals, and they, in due course, dismantled the steps towards the Strategic Defense Initiative. So that was brought about because of clear awareness of even bigger dangers than had previously been expected. But it would not have succeeded just by causing people to panic. There had to be a positive way forwards, which was by these initiatives called trust but verify. So the verification schemes that could be put in place. So there was a positive vision too, alongside the negative vision. And we need that today. We need the greater awareness of the risks, that this is a very serious initiative, but we also need greater awareness of the positive steps that can be taken, which are a combination of technology, but also transformation in human relationships and transformation in human thinking.
You need a careful balance to amplify the effect of MAD, mutually assured destruction. Imagine if you could amplify that emotion or that fear aspect. There are so many. I remember watching, it's going to be a dumb example, but watching The Walking Dead and always wondering what it would be like to live in a zombie apocalypse. And then I had a really intense dream about it. And it was something that shocked me from ever wanting a zombie apocalypse to ever happen. And it's been about 10 years and I still have that dream. So it's like you need something like maybe it's a message in your dreams, maybe it's some type of realization. Like, if you have everyone has a fear about something, heights, roller coasters, whatever you want to say. Imagine if you can make that extend over into something like weapon capabilities with tech. And then you start having this overall fear, not just about someone destroying you with the same idea that you had, but this idea of how damaging it would be. If you had like people that are really sensitive to the environment, they tend to act really drastic and, overaction to try and save the environment, for instance. Imagine if you amplified that thing to realize that there is no good that comes out of weaponizing something like this in everybody's mind to where no one would ever think to add it up.
Exactly. So this is not a simple topic by any means. It needs a lot of thought. It was hard to create the technology in the first place. It needed millions of people's ideas to build on top of each other and to cooperate. And likewise, it's going to need lots of cooperation and people's insights reinforcing and supporting each other's to figure out how we can use it truly for safety and for beneficial purposes.
Huh. Well, David, you've given me enough of your time, man. I really appreciate you joining me on this episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Is there a place where people can find you?
So you can find me on Twitter, DW2, that's the digit 2. You can find my books online at my corporate website, Delta Wisdom. Includes this most recent one, which is quite a thick book. It's 642 pages that goes into some of the stuff we're discussing. It is an important topic. It's Vital Foresight. What are the things we need to foresee better? And the case for active transhumanism, which means that the way we're going to get rid of these issues and deal with these issues is by having a positive vision of a much better future. So that's Delta Wisdom. I might say that on this question of ethics, which we've touched on a few times, I'm very much in favor of taking these ethical questions seriously, but I would point out there's two kinds of ethical failure. One is when you do the wrong thing. You're excited and you create something and afterwards, oh, I shouldn't have created it. This was a mistake. But that's a sin of commission, as it were. But there's also what the theologians used to call sins of omission, not doing things. If we stand back and don't get involved, that's equally bad. So if people fail to create the technologies that could elevate us out of our present situation, I think that is deeply regrettable too. So the lack of creation of nanotechnology, the lack of creation of safe artificial general intelligence, that is also deeply deplorable. So I don't want to just focus on let's stop doing things because we might make mistakes. I think there are things we need to do as well, positive things. And if we don't get involved, that is equally deplorable and equally unethical in my view.
Well, all right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast. Stay tuned for next episode.